All right, I am calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Council's Committee on Ways and Means. In accordance with the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct our meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and also on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, FiOS 964. It's also being recorded. If you want to testify at this hearing today, please email ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's ccc.wm for Ways and Means at boston.gov to sign up and receive the Zoom login information. And you can also send us written testimony to that same email, ccc.wm@boston.gov. And if you're watching the hearing afterwards, we continue to receive testimony. So feel free to send that written testimony afterwards as well. Today's hearing is on Docket 1166, message and order for your approval, an order authorizing the City of Boston to appropriate the amount of $1,212,000 for the purpose of paying the cost of a feasibility study and schematic design associated with the boiler and window and door replacement projects at certain Boston public schools, including the payments of all costs incidental or related thereto, and for which the City of Boston may be eligible for a grant from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, said amount to be expended under the direction of the Public Facilities Department on behalf of the Boston Public Schools. And Docket 1182, order relative to the adoption of classification in the City of Boston in fiscal year 2022. And I just want to explain for folks watching at home that normally we would not have a hearing on two totally different topics as we are having today, one about our property tax classification and one about school building. However, we're nearing the end of the council's legislative year, and the MSBA request, because the nature of the appropriation request needs 2 votes from the council that are 2 weeks apart. And the only way that can happen is if we take the first one this Wednesday. And similarly, classification has a state statutory deadline where it needs to be adopted by this Wednesday. Since these are both urgent matters before the committee, we've combined them into 2 hearings today, which does mean that we'll have sort of 2 sets of panels. And I apologize in advance to the second panelist for having to wait for the first. But I want to thank my colleagues for joining. In order of arrival, Councillor Ed Flynn from District 2, Councillor Liz Braden, District 9, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, and Councillor Anissa Asabi-George at large. Thank you all for joining us. And from the administration side, we're joined today on the MSBA docket 1166 by David Bloom, the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for Boston Public Schools, and Carrie Griffin, the Director of our Public Facilities Department. And then on 1182 classification, we're joined by Commissioner Nicholas Arenello, our Assessing Department Commissioner, and Pam Coker, the President of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, which is a third-party watchdog agency in the city, but has traditionally weighed in on this docket. And we're grateful to you, Pam, too, for being here. To get started, I'll just see, do colleagues want to say a word at the start here? Raise your hand, maybe.
Council Bach, I don't need to say an opening statement.
Okay. All right.
Councilor Bach, neither do I.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Me neither.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ed, Liz, Michael, Anissa, are you okay if we waive opening statements? Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So then without further ado, I will go first to Carrie and David on the MSBA docket.
Good morning, councilors. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning to allow us to come present to you about the MSBA projects that we are working on, or we are proposing, sorry, for this year in collaboration with the Public Facilities Department. Just see if I can share my screen so I can show you the presentation. Wonderful. And I see, is there someone maybe who can give me a little thumbs up?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Each year, the Boston Public Schools and the City Public Facilities Department collaborate on a series of accelerated repair projects that we apply to with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or MSBA. We submit a statement of interest in the summer. The MSBA comes and does site visits, and then they vote to formally invite us to the program, which is what just happened this past October. We follow up once we have that formal invitation. We file a loan order request for the city for funding for the portion of the projects that will be funded through city funding versus. We have 4 projects that are invited to join the MSBA Accelerated Repairs Program. 2 projects involving boilers, one at the Henderson Upper School, one at the William E. Russell School, and 2 projects involving windows and doors at the Boston Day and Evening Academy and at the Rafael Hernandez School. These projects were identified due to the age and typical life cycle of the assets involved. As you can see, the boilers at the Henderson Upper School, not all the boilers, but some of the boilers at the Henderson Upper School are past their typical asset useful life, similarly at the Russell. And while the windows at the Day and Evening and the Hernandez are not yet at their typical asset useful life, they are still well past 3 decades of use and are showing signs of needing repair. And we are excited to work in collaboration with the Public Facilities Department and the MSBA to make these needed building upgrades to these 4 schools. And with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you, David. And Carrie, are you presenting anything, or are you just here to also answer questions?
I'm just here to, thank you, Council. I'm just here to answer questions if there are any.
Great, fantastic. All right, so I guess, and David, can you remind me, since obviously what counselors and the BPS families and teachers we represent are always care about with these projects is, when are they going to happen? So what, if this is approved and we go forward with the design, what's sort of the time cycle? I know I remember that often window projects take us longer than the boiler or roof projects to execute on. But if you could just speak to that a little bit, or Carrie could.
David, do you want me to?
I'll let Carrie take that one. Thank you.
So once we show the appropriation of funds to MSB, they'll assign a OPM and a designer. That should be, within the next, probably like March. And then from there, then we'll go into, then we'll have to go into this. The funds right now are only for feasibility and schematic design. So that would start initially, and then we'd go to the MSBA board to get voted for a full project. So these would not be starting until 2023, based on when the board votes and we'd come back before the council for the full appropriation of the projects funding for the remaining of design and construction costs. So these would not be until more than likely the 2023 would be the when we would start construction, probably that summer.
Got it. Great. Okay. And then, and am I right in remembering that sometimes with windows, it takes 2 summers of work?
It does. We're doing that now at the Henderson lower. We're doing all the other interior work, but the actual windows will not start until next summer.
Mm-hmm. And David, I know that, I think we voted previously, right? When you guys put in the application on these sites, I believe so. So I think it came up then, but obviously you guys do some due diligence on, my understanding is when the state puts money into these buildings, it then becomes difficult for us to repurpose these buildings for non-school uses. And so these, the school department has done its diligence on the fact that these are buildings that we wouldn't want to be cycling out of anytime soon, right?
Yes, these 4 buildings are all buildings that we are very comfortable making the 20-year commitment to with the MSBA for continued use of school buildings.
Great, thank you. All right, I want to go to my colleagues for questions. I might have a couple more at the end. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Block. Councilor Block, I'm just listening to the discussions. I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Braden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's more of a process question in terms of this. This is an incredible opportunity to get some extra funds to do some necessary renovations to our school buildings. Is there a pipeline, like our public facilities? Do we have a pipeline that I'm sure we have, but I just wanted to know how that works in terms of lining up projects ahead of time, 2 or 3 years out. Is that something we do?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, and it's such a great one. So there are a couple of different things we're doing. So one is, yes, we're sort of thinking about what are the next set of, we're trying to get ahead of the next set of planning out what the MSBA projects will be. So we, each year are submitting and trying to get our full value out of the program. But then the other thing I'll just say is that we're also not only doing these sorts of repairs through the MSBA process. So we're also constantly evaluating our buildings for needs and things that we need to do. And so there are other capital improvement projects that you see through the more traditional capital budget process that are similar in nature. So you might see other projects for windows or doors or other things. And so this work in particular is really prioritizing those buildings, to Councillor Bach's point, that we know we're going to be maintaining as school facilities over the long term, and we can really then make that commitment to the state and the MSBA through this process.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I had.
Great, thanks so much. And I think Councillor Flynn actually did have a question. So Councillor Flynn, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Block, for giving me that opportunity. I apologize. So I want to say thank you to you, Councilor Block. Just want to recognize the city officials that are here and are doing an exceptional job for the residents of Boston. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to our city officials. And I also wanted to, I guess my question is, one issue that I've focused on a lot on BPS is the heating system and the air conditioned systems. And are we able to somehow have a comprehensive plan to ensure, especially many of the older schools, that we have the proper heating, we have the proper air condition, we have the proper ventilation system in our schools, whether it's using the MSBA money or federal money. So I just wanted to ask this school officials or city officials, and again, just want to say thank you for your work, but I know this issue is important.
Yeah, Councillor Flynn, I really appreciate that question as well. And I think it is aligned to something that the superintendent has been working on and we've been working on, trying to work on really collaboratively with Carrie and her team at Public Facilities, is the sort of short-term stopgap measures and longer-term plans we need to make to really address some of the long-standing capital improvement issues we have in our school buildings. And I think, I've been, I'm personally somewhat new to the capital process over the last 2 years, and I think I've really appreciated that partnership. And so some of the things you'll see in the short term are things like using some of our ESSER money from the federal government to help us with things like air conditioning and air quality in buildings where adding an HVAC system is not a short-term measure. But then also, I think we are, one of the things that the public facilities team has been really helping us with in all of our capital projects that are going on and all the existing accelerated repair projects and other things is thinking about what are the smaller things we can do in some of our old buildings, even if it's not putting in a full HVAC system to make those improvements. And so it really is a collaborative effort. And then I think really long-term, the answer is going to be things like new school buildings. And just those things, will take time. But, I've been a part of some of the meetings about the Carter School Building project going on through the MSBA. And I think, it's a really exciting vision of the future of what BPS schools can be. And we're excited to continue to be proposing new schools through that process in partnership with Carrie's team to really have BPS schools be those modern schools that our students deserve.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Kerry, for the important work that you do in our city. And David, you mentioned the Carter School, and it's probably had the opportunity to visit many schools, if not all of the schools in the city of Boston. And I think that's probably my favorite school in the city of Boston is this Carter School. The teachers, the principal, the students, and the parents. All working together. So just want to say thank you for your work on the Carter School and in other schools. But Council Block, thank you for taking me out of turn.
No trouble at all, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to follow on the line of Councillor Braden. How were these schools prioritized for the window and the boiler repairs? And is there a matrix or a point system that's used to determine which schools need repairs more urgently? And a follow-up to that is, do we have an idea of the total of MSBA funds that we've secured in this fiscal year and how much we've already spent? And lastly, will these repairs result in any additional cost savings down the line for these schools, as in cost of heating, energy savings, et cetera? Do we have the metrics in place to manage that as well as we continue to move forward and get our schools up to
Councillor Flaherty, we lost you at the end there, but I think the gist of the councillor's question was clear.
Yes. So I wouldn't go so far as to say we have a point system. But I think for determining which buildings go through the MSBA process, but I think the table that we're showing now is one of the main things we're looking at in terms of sort of the age of the building versus the age of the asset in the building, so the boilers or the windows or the doors compared to their typical useful life. I think the other thing we're factoring in is a little bit of sort of qualitative data from the staff at the school. We have some older boilers that are actually performing really well still, and we have some older boilers that are on their last legs. And so prioritizing those, I think, is a key part of it. I know also, for example, with the two projects we're working on right now in East Boston for the accelerated repair project, the team has collected data on utility rates and utility usage for those two buildings. So we have that data from before the repair has taken place. And I'm sure, though not speaking from technical expertise, that replacing a 40-year-old boiler with a more modern system will lead to some energy improvements there. And I think that's definitely an exciting part of this work, is sort of modernizing the equipment in the buildings. Carrie, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything about the energy efficiency part of it.
I would say just to add to that, David, is the RBT program that we are also doing. PFD also manages with our partners in environment. The phase 3 is going to be, that will be coming out, and that has about 30 schools on it also for additional energy incentives. So in addition to the ARPs, the capital improvements that we do within the schools, we also have phase 3 of the RBT, which will be looking at consumption and replacement of equipment, or looking at some alternate energy sources.
And then just the overall amount of SBA funds we've used to date, and give me the opportunity to opine briefly on a couple of administrations ago in terms of their lack of engagement on this issue. We squandered so many opportunities to bring our schools up to date on a lot of these things. So we're sort of playing catch up, and it started with the Walsh administration realizing that we missed so many opportunities through the Mass School Building Assistance Program. Head scratches, and we only built 3 schools during that time, when we probably should have built anywhere from 12 to 15. So nothing like crying over spilt milk. But if you can turn around and just maybe give me the sense as to how much of the funds have we been allocated, how much have we used to date, and then what's left moving forward.
Council, if I could get those numbers to you after we could, for the ARP reimbursement, but also for JQUS, Carter, and the Boston Arts Academy. I can get you, I'd rather give you more accurate numbers for what we've received for reimbursement for the ARPs, but also our core projects that we're managing.
Very good. No problem at all, Carrie. And thank you for your work on this, and good to see you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks so much, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Anissa Sabi-George.
Thank you, Chairman Bach, and thank you for this presentation this morning. I don't really have any questions. I'm supportive of all of these proposals that are before us, and think that these investments aren't ever quick enough, and wish that we could speed this process up. But thank you for the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Sabi-George. I'm heartened to see that the MSBA is supporting 4 of our projects. I know that, we had, in terms of the proportional size of Boston to the rest of the state and everything, we had been up at this 3 or 4 level. And then I think last time around dipped to 2. And so I'm glad to see them supporting 4 of our projects. David, is my recollection right in that? You're muted.
Yes, I have the problem I have with them all is that they all sort of blend together in my head, and I forget which one started in which year. But yes, I think one of the things I think that's also really clear is the MSBA values the sort of community support for these projects as well, and that it's not just the school department going to them and asking, but that we're really able to represent the full city government in this. And I think that really helps our case with the MSBA. And so, I just really appreciate all of the councilors' support for these projects. And we're excited to continue. We're already starting to think about the next round. So really excited to continue that work for projects big and small.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you remember what the, I know that, or I don't know if it's you or Carrie, but I know the reimbursement rate for these accelerated repair projects is higher than the reimbursement rate for the core projects. Obviously, the core projects are much larger. So to Councillor Flaherty's point, we get a very large sum of money from the MSBA on those, but I know that it's a higher reimbursement rate on these. Can you give us a sense of what that is?
I apologize, Council Bach. I'll get that information to you. I don't know what this year's reimbursement rate is for the ARPs, but I can get that information to you rather quickly.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. It would be great if you could get it to me today, Carrie. And the same with the info for Councilor Flaherty, just because I am intending to move this docket tomorrow. And yeah, I always like to be able to tell councilors when we pass an appropriation, sort of what proportion of it we can reasonably expect reimbursement for, and what proportion is obviously on the city's credit. So that would be helpful. All right. And I guess the one other thing that I'll say, and it's a conversation we've had with Carlton at the last few of these hearings on the MSBA, and I wouldn't want to let it go, is just, and I think it's a conversation to be had with the new mayor's administration. And I know there's a lot of folks working on equity and procurement, but sort of the sense that, to Councilor Sabi George's point, there's a lot of these projects in the pipeline that need doing. And we sort of know, like, boilers, roofs, windows, like it's kind of this recurring need. And so the question of, could we set up a more reliable set of minority owned and women owned and, like enterprises and folks with high participation of local folks and folks of color and women, like to actually do these projects, because it's kind of like a consistent pipeline of a consistent type of project that we have in the city. And my impression is that, we don't have that diversity in the general contractors that we hire to do these. And although that's hard across the construction field, these are a little bit more plain vanilla projects, the ARP side, than the core side. And so it feels like there's an opportunity to develop a city specific pipeline and start to crack into some of those procurement numbers that way from a diversity perspective. So I'll just say we've had that conversation a few times. We always have a new administration. And I just think that this is an area where it makes a lot of sense to kind of line those objectives up. Councilor Braden, I see your hand is up. Did you want to weigh in?
It's not pertaining to these accelerated repair projects. It's more about the pipeline for the major core projects. We are closing our Jackson Man complex and we're gradually going to close it but by 2023, the Jackson Man School is closing next June, and then the Horace Mann will be moving to the Edwards in Charlestown in 2023. I don't understand now in terms of the planning for the rebuilding of a new elementary school on the Jackson Man site. What is the timeline for that? And just basically give me an update on where we're at with that, with thinking about that project.
Very happy to. So we're in the very early stages of planning that. I think our main focus right now is the transitions for the students of the Jackson Man and the program at the Horace Mann. So working to get those two projects really sort of set first over the next couple months, and I feel like we're on track with those. And then we'll be able to come back to you all with some more details about sort of what that new bill will look like. But I think one of the things we're engaging in right now is sort of what is the K-6 physical plant design of the future for BPS. That's one of the things we're working on in partnership with the Public Facilities Department. Is a sort of set of sort of common design elements or things that we want to see in a K-6 of the future. And to be clear, when I say K-6, I mean K0 through 6. Pre-K, I really should say P6, but I don't know what that term is caught on yet. And with the idea that we don't need to be redesigning from scratch every time we build a K-6, and we don't want that to be such a unusual thing to happen that it needs a new design, because it's the first time in 5 years Boston's building a new K-6, so we'll start a new design process. We hope that building these K-6 buildings will be such a sort of standard thing that we're doing and launching each year that we can work with a sort of standard set of design principles. So we're launching that work as well now, and that will have a big impact on the design of the a school on the future Jackson Man site.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the other thing to bear in mind with the Jackson Man site is it is co-situated with the Jackson Man Community Center. And in this era when we're thinking about hub schools, the community center is a vital part of that. So not every K-6 will have a community center attached to it, but that's an important consideration. And I really appreciate. I'm going to keep asking this question as we go forward because this is a big concern in our neighborhood, and we want to see it done right. And thank you for the update. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. And one more question, just I think for Carrie. I think you said this, but the money that we would appropriate here, it's for the design contracts, which no.
No, that's correct, Councillor. It's for the OPM and the designer, but it's only to take us to SD. So only to feasibility and then schematic design.
And
so about 25.
And the state assigns those people, right?
They issue them. We don't have a choice or use one of our internal house doctors, or we'd go out to bid on a Chapter 7C designer RFQ if it was ours.
Got it. Okay. That's how I remembered it. All right. So I think if any other councillors have questions, please raise your hands. Otherwise, I think I do want to move on to the next docket. I want to thank Carrie and David for joining us today and echo Councillor Flaherty's comment that, I think we've made much better use of the MSBA support, financial support for, the needs for our in many cases, very elderly BPS buildings than we had in the past. And that's well appreciated. And certainly I'll be recommending first passage of these dockets at council tomorrow. It would be great, Carrie and David, if you guys could just follow up via Chantal with some of those information requests and get them to me, ideally by the end of the day today or latest tomorrow morning, so that I can be prepared to share them with the council in the meeting on Wednesday. So with that, thank you both. I'm now going to move on to our second docket of the day. And because it's been a little while, I'll just remind people this is docket 1182. It's an order relative to the adoption of classification in the city of Boston in fiscal year 2022. And to discuss it, we are joined by our assessor, Commissioner Nicholas Arenello. And then we'll also hear from Pam Coker of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. So Commissioner Arenello, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, councilors. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm here to talk about classification and the residential exemption. Sorry, for the record, my name is Nick Arenello. I'm the Commissioner of Assessing for the City of Boston. The two programs that we're talking about today, the classification started back in the 1970s. And it is a way to have multiple tax rates for different kinds of property. And so since its existence, the city of Boston, by the mayor and the city council, have acted every year to maximize the tax rate shift and to minimize the tax burden that is put on our residential property and the constituents of the city. The second thing that we're here to talk about today is the residential exemption. That is also something that requires an annual approval by the city council and the mayor. And that is also a program that has been adopted and maximized by the city of Boston every year that it's been in existence. The most recent exemption amount allowed is 35% of the average value of our residential real estate. That was a change that happened in 2017. There are only 15 communities throughout the Commonwealth that have a residential exemption program and that choose to participate in that. And the city of Boston is one of only 4 that last year in fiscal year 21 chose to maximize that exemption to the full 35%. Both of these programs are excellent programs for our constituency. They generate an enormous amount of savings. The residential exemption last year saved qualifying homeowners just over $3,100 off of their tax bills, which is makes for a big impact. Classification also has an enormous impact on our residential homeowners. Classification last year saved the average single-family homeowner just over $2,300. And so both these programs combined are really excellent choices, and I'm here to support them on behalf of the administration.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I think probably what makes the most sense is just to let Pam weigh in now, and then I'll go to counselors for questions and comments. Pam?
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation. As Nick noted, some statistics about how this law works and how successful it has been in providing property tax relief for residents. A couple of things I would like to add to that, drilling down a little bit more. As an example, fiscal year 2021, the city's application of classification resulted in a little over $2,500 savings for a homeowner in a residential condo, over $2,300 for owner of a single family home in their residence, over $2,500 on a 2-family home, and over $3,200 on a 3-family home. So we see those individual benefits to residential taxpayers related to classification and the residential exemption opportunity. I did want to highlight the shift that happens to the share of residential versus business property carrying the weight of the levy. So for example, last year, fiscal year 2021, the residential property class in Boston, the value was 66.7%, but the residential class was levied only 41.7% of the total value. In contrast, the business class of property in the city of Boston was 28.7% of the total value, but paid just over 50% of the tax levy. So we continue to see that for the most part, the city is thriving with that classification applied. At the same time, certainly just want to reemphasize that the business property class is paying a significant more of the actual bill for property taxes across the city of Boston. A couple of other things that I wanted to note. Thinking ahead based on what we're talking about today, and then going forward, the setting of the property tax rate. In fiscal year 2021, Boston's residential tax rate increased by 11 cents or 1%. And at the same time, the commercial tax rate decreased by 37 cents or 1.5% of the tax rate. So we're seeing tax rate changes reflecting residential property value increasing at a greater rate than the business property value. And that's also associated with the city's application of classification. So I found it interesting last year. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year, if anything, with that change in commercial versus residential tax rate dynamic, where it's the commercial tax rate that sees an additional decrease. And it'll be interesting to understand what might happen going forward if that continues. A couple of things, again, thinking ahead with classification going in place for fiscal year 2022. Also thinking about the impact going forward, potentially of remote work and fewer businesses returning full staff to downtown Boston and all of across the city of Boston as well, particularly our larger businesses. It's good news if there are spaces to fill, if those spaces are able to serve another purpose, such as residential housing downtown in Boston or lab space. That dynamic could be bad news if the office space conversion to labs or housing is not always a good fit for new use. And I do note as well that Governor Baker sent home many of the state employees to fully remote work for those not requiring to be on site for in-person services. So just thinking about the impact of the pandemic and what may be coming to our city going forward in regards to property taxes and value. Look forward to continuing the conversation with the tax rate setting and looking forward to heading into the coming calendar year. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam, for those comments. And I do just want to draw councilors' attention to the fact that there is in your inbox from Michelle Goldberg briefing, the classification hearing brief for FY22 from Nick's office. So if people don't have that in front of you, you may want to pull it up. And if anyone watching the hearing would like that document, I'll make sure it gets posted afterwards on our notice, but you can also email ccc.wm@boston.gov and we will shoot it over to you now. So Nick, I guess my first question really is on that, that question of the shift and, remind me again last year what the residential and commercial rates were.
Yeah, so in fiscal 21, the residential tax rate was $10.67. And the commercial tax rate was $24.55.
Right.
Basically, if we didn't have classification last year, we would have had an overall rate that was just over $14.
Okay, great. So yeah, so for folks watching at home, and I'm just going to repeat what you guys have said, but I'm just trying to make it intelligible, no offense. Basically, before Boston backed this whole classification thing back in the day, it would have been like, you own a piece of property in the city, you get taxed this rate, right? And so it's like $14 a square foot, right? And then what we did with classification was we created the ability to have different categories with different rates. Mm-hmm. And so now if you think about it, if it's like, you said it was 1062, was that it? Was it 1062 or 1067? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just needed to unmute myself. It was $10.67. And without classification, it would have been $14.03.
Right. So basically, it's if people like, basically that sends it up. If we didn't have classification, we have to re-choose to have classification every year, which is what this docket is about. If we chose not to do this, we didn't pass the docket, then that harmonized rate for all property would mean that residential tax rates would go up by about 1/3 over what they're at right now. So it would be a really significant change in kind of the structure of the tax base and how much we're asking residents to pay. And then conversely, the commercial tax rate, you said it was up at, was it 24? Sorry, Nick.
$24.55.
Right, $24.55, and it come down to that $14 and change number. So that would be a huge cut in commercial taxes. So if we didn't have classification, that's what would happen. You'd have a big cut in commercial taxes and a big increase in residential taxes. And so this is a mechanism by which we keep residential taxes lower, and as Pam is acknowledging, put more of a tax burden on our commercial real estate base. The challenge with this, people listening at home might be like, but I feel like my taxes still went up last year as a residential homeowner. And this is what Pam mentioned. That's because there's a limit of how much of the overall value in the city of all the property in the city, like how skewed the tax burden can be compared to the skew of that value. And the challenge is that residential properties have been raising their valuations faster than commercial ones. I think everybody knows home values in Boston have been going through the roof, and then already commercial weren't moving at the same speed. And now with the pandemic, there's enough uncertainty about commercial that the values are not rising at the same rate. So there's just, and there's only so much of the tax base that the city is allowed to shift from residential to commercial. Is that all accurate, Nick?
Yep, that's all very accurate. And I should, might be helpful for me to add that last year, because the city council and the mayor implemented both of these programs, the average single family tax bill for Boston was $4,281. This is dramatically lower than the majority of all of our surrounding communities. There are only 2 surrounding communities that had a lower average single family tax bill, and those were Chelsea and Everett. But every other neighboring community had a higher average tax bill than that. And that's due to the city's finances, but it's also due in large part to classification and the residential exemption program.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and residential exemption is an additional thing, as Nick has explained, which just takes a certain amount of the residential value, out of consideration altogether, right? And so that is another way. And I think it is important to stress for folks watching at home, both that what the city of Boston is able to do on the tax front is extremely constrained by state law, and that both of these things, classification and the residential exemption, have been state law changes that were fought for by residents of the city of Boston to try to ease the burden on residents. And sorry, and Pam said these numbers, but again, I didn't jot them down. The amount of the increases last year, Nick. So not the comparison of classification, not classification, but just the tax rate increases last year, residential, commercial, or increase, decrease.
Sure. So between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, the residential tax rate went up 11 cents. So in fiscal year 20, the residential tax rate was $10.56. And then fiscal 21, the residential tax rate was $10.67. And then for the commercial tax rates, for fiscal 2020, the commercial tax rate was $24.92. And then the commercial tax rate went down like 37 cents to $24.55.
Right. Okay. And that's because of that difference in value changes that we're seeing. And should we, to Pam's point, expect that trend to continue this year? I know that you're not able to give me those numbers yet. Is that right for next year?
Yeah, so we're still in the process of finalizing values and finalizing tax rates, and also, the results of the city council's vote on this proposal will dramatically impact what those final tax rates end up being. Generally speaking, both commercial value and residential value did not grow to the same extent in the past. It's really almost 2 years ago now, the time period that we're looking at for tax value. So they do not grow as fast as they have grown in the past, but there is still a degree of residential growth outpacing commercial growth.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Councillor Braden, do you have any questions?
Just a quick, last year, a lot of my constituencies had an element of sticker shock that their residential tax rate seemed to jump exponentially. Can you explain that? I think it was because there was a periodic revaluation, and there was a significant jump from previous revaluation. So could you clarify that for me? I know that's a question I get asked a lot.
Sure. So last year was every year, the city's values require approval by the state. But some years that approval process is more intense than others. And those years are recertification years. Sometimes we call them revaluation years. The cycle that the city is on, we had a revaluation last year for fiscal 21. And that was the first one that we've had in 5 years. So the prior one was fiscal 16. One of the things that we do during that time period is we rebuild our valuation models to try and make sure that we are accurately reflecting the market value of people's homes. And as those models get stale, we trend values during interim years. And so we do make adjustments, and we are still obligated to keep everything at 100% of its fair cash value and get those values approved by the state on an annual basis. But the trending process is a little different than rebuilding models. And so I think a lot of what happened last year was people's tax values catching up with their property values and what their homes would actually sell for. We've also had an issue where for a number of years, residential property within the city of Boston, the prices have been growing dramatically and the market values of homes have been growing dramatically. And so when your property is worth 10, 15% more than it was the year before, that's going to make your tax bill go up. And so that was also a factor. Is that a helpful explanation,
Yeah.
Councilor?
It's not much comfort to our constituents, though, when they're not there. A lot of them are semi-retired or retired and on fixed income, and I think there was a tremendous amount of anxiety about the sudden increase. I think some people had a 40% increase in their tax bill, so that was pretty shocking. And they're not going anywhere, you know, and they haven't made any improvements to their homes. So I think it's a reflection of the fact of this sort of very hot real estate market that the property values are increasing exponentially. And yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that because that's something I get asked a lot. Thank you, Nick. There was one other thought I had. So in terms of the commercial real estate taxes, are there other programs that to help support small businesses and defray the impact of, like, we're seeing a lot of small businesses shut up shop and give up their business. Is there capacity to develop some innovative programs to help support small businesses with their real estate taxes?
So I think that's, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead, Nick.
So I think that there's always the opportunity to have a conversation about what kinds of things we can do and what new laws we might want to consider to help out various constituents and businesses within the city. Part of the trick of helping out small businesses, in particular with property taxes, is that it's a very small subset of small businesses that actually own the real estate. And property taxes are also usually, even if they are passed through, they're a very small percentage of that business's overall costs. And so I think that it can usually end up with a more directed program trying to help exactly who you want to help. If you kind of don't alter the property tax structure so much as kind of try and create a grant program or create opportunities where you're providing assistance that you can then have be more targeted, and that way you're not kind of interfering with this longstanding constitutionally constricted program of property taxes. So it's kind of like you use the money after the fact, after it's collected, and then figure out how to provide assistance, as opposed to trying to figure out how to alter how much you're collecting up front.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Councillor Asabi George.
Sorry, trying to figure out how to get my screen here full size. No, I don't have any specific questions, just listening in this morning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, and I think I've asked all of my questions. I mean, I guess just to follow up on Councillor Braden's point that one of the things that the first point was that one of the things that we were discussing with Councillor Flynn as well back in February was sort of, is there a way for the city of Boston to go back again and think about like targeted programs that help in particular that, you know, that category of fixed income senior who's got housing that they own and where the valuation increase, well, welcome is not something that they're going to be able to like liquidate anytime soon without leaving the city, which they don't want to do, right? And I think one of the things we discussed and that Nick was just alluding to is that because property tax is about 3/4 of the tax base for the city, like when we're trying to help folks who are in a tough situation, any potential exemption needs to really be tailored for those folks. Because if you just do broad brush things, you could end up cutting out a whole bunch of the city's like basis with which we pay for lots of the programs that our constituents also want. And that, of course, you know, serve a progressive function of in many cases, doing things for the most vulnerable, like folks in the city who are not able to own property, right? And so it's like, so there's a trade-off there that you don't want to undercut the city's tax base, but we all, I think, know people who are stuck in the bind that Councillor Braden described. And there is an existing exemption for people in that bind. It's just got an extremely low income threshold. And so it seems like it's, especially with the rise of the cost of living, not kind of capturing everybody who is experiencing that pinch point. Is that fair, Nick? As a summary of our prior conversations, not asking you to commit on any particular future exemption.
No, that's fair. My silence was trying to find the unmute button. So yeah, no, one program that we do have that does have a slightly higher income limit that can be excellent for the type of constituent that y'all are referring to, which is someone that is a senior and maybe on a fixed income, and their property has gained a lot of value, but they're not interested in kind of selling their property and moving out, is our 41A deferral program. And the city council was instrumental in, I think 2 years ago now, voting to approve, because that's a deferral program, it's essentially a loan, but it's a loan that people don't pay off until their property sells. Or that the property transfers because they pass away. And the interest rate on that used to be 4%. And I believe it was 2 years ago, the city council voted to approve that interest rate being reduced to 1%, which is an excellent opportunity to kind of take taxes off the table of something that our seniors worry about, and at a rate that is better than like a current mortgage, which is usually the benchmark for the best residential term someone can get to borrow money. So we do have programs, but that doesn't mean that's not worth thinking about, you know, new programs, how to tweak the terms, how to make sure the income limits are appropriate, and figure out what changes make sense.
Great, thank you so much. Any councilors, any other questions? If not, I think I just want to thank Nick and Pam for presenting today, and say that, I mean, it's obvious to me that to not adopt classification and hit the city's residential taxpayers with roughly a third increase in their real estate taxes is not something that I think the council should do. So I will certainly, as the chair of Ways and Means, be recommending that we continue to adopt classification at the maximum and the residential exemption on Wednesday. So definitely look forward to proposing passage, and then to continue working on these other things that that we need to, look to extend, especially, as we see as the final tax rates come out, kind of what the impact is on folks. All right. Seeing nothing else, this hearing of sorry, I should first ask, Michelle, is there anybody here for public testimony before I adjourn us?
Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, great. All right, then in that case, this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day.